"You have no right to talk here," rugged lawyer Richard Blackwood pointing his finger at the young Philippine who raised his chair at the bottom of the room. "This is an audience for Americans, not for undocumented immigrants." The Chicago Immigration Court was booing with tension. Dozens of families were waiting for their destinations, while Miguel Santos, only 24 years old, watched his own mother being questioned in the witness bank. Rosa Santos had worked for 15 years as a nurse in a public hospital, saving lives throughout the pandemic, but now faced deportation for alleged irregularities in her documents. The echo of Blackwood's voice reverberated the cold walls of the court, carrying all the weight of the prejudice that family had faced for years. Each word was calculated to humiliate, to remind everyone that, in his view, there was a clear hierarchy about those who deserved rights in that country. Blackwood, a private lawyer hired by the hospital to get rid of troubled staff, displayed his arrogance as a trophy. He had arrived in court that December morning with the absolute certainty that that would be another easy case, another immigrant family who would be deported without resistance, thickening his statistics of victories he sported in business meetings. "Mr. Santos," said Judge Morrison impatiently, adjusting his glasses as he flipped into papers, "your son cannot intervene without proper legal representation. Please keep him silent or ask for the room." Miguel had grown on the outskirts of Manila until he was 10, when his mother got a visa to work in the United States. For years, she cleared hospital floors at dawn to pay for her son's studies, dreaming that he became a lawyer. While other classmates spent the weekends at parties, Miguel worked as a pizza delivery man during the day and studied until high hours, memorizing each law, every precedent, every legal breach that could one day protect his family. Rosa's hands shivered slightly when she heard Blackwood's cruel comment. 15 years of dedication to the American health system, double shifts during the COVID-19 peak, to save lives without a color or origin, and was yet treated as a second-class citizen. But something in her son's posture reassured her instantly. What no one in that room knew was that Miguel had graduated in international law from Northwestern University just 6 months earlier, ending the top 3 in the class. Nor did they know that he had spent the last 2 years secretly documenting each case of discrimination he witnessed, each Blackwood prejudiced commentary, each hospital's unethical maneuver against immigrant staff. For months, Miguel had silently observed Blackwood's intimidation tactics. He had witnessed hearings where entire families were separated by legal techniques, where honest people were deported while their employers were free from any responsibility, and with every injustice witnessed, its determination only grew. "With all due respect, Your Excellence," Miguel answered in a firm but respectful voice, "I have the right to represent my mother at this hearing, as provided for in Article 292(1) of the Immigration Code." A murmur toured the room. Other immigrant families raised their heads with a spark of hope in their eyes. Blackwood laughed with contempt, turning to some colleagues who watched the gallery. "This boy has learned a few beautiful words on the internet and now you think you're a lawyer? Please." Blackwood's laugh echoed through the room like the sound of a hyena in front of a wounded prey. He had used exactly the same tactic dozens of times before, ridiculing any attempt at self-defense to discourage other immigrants from questioning the system. But Rosa Santos looked at her son and saw something in her eyes that made her breathe for the first time in months. It was neither fear nor despair, but a serenity that only exists in those who studied each comma of the law for years and kept silence, waiting for the right moment to reveal its true strength. "Mr. Blackwood," Miguel said calmly, removing a folder from his beaten backpack. "Before continuing his comments on my ability, I would like to present to the court my Northwestern University School Diploma of Law and my newly approved license by the Illinois Bar." The smile on Blackwood's face froze for a moment. Some murmurs by surprise echoed through the room. Other families began to lean forward, trying to see better what was going on. Judge Morrison frowned and asked to examine the documents. While the room was in absolute illness, Miguel kept standing with the posture worthy of those who knew exactly what he was doing. "Authentic documents," the judge confirmed after a few minutes, who seemed eternal. "Mr. Santos has the right to represent his mother. He can proceed." Blackwood tried to disguise the discomfort, but small drops of sweat began to form on his forehead. For years, he had underestimated families like the Saints, treating them as numbers in their victory worksheet. He never imagined that one of the children of those immigrants could be armed with the same legal weapons he used to destroy lives. The room in the room has changed instantly. The heavy air of resignation gave way to something different, an expectation electric current that traveled each bank. Every family that had seen its American dreams collapse under the weight of a system that seemed projected against them. If you are enjoying this story of turnaround and justice, be sure to subscribe to the channel to find out how a young man underestimated by its origin would turn a public humiliation into the greatest respect of respect that this court has ever witnessed. because what Blackwood didn't know yet was that every prejudiced word that had pronounced in recent months was meticulously documented and about to turn into its own professional ruin. Blackwood adjusted the tie with arrogance as if about to crush an annoying insect. "Very well, Santos," said, dragging the surname with disdain. "Since you insist on playing lawyer, let's see what you are capable." He went to Judge Morrison with a confident smile. "Your Excellence, I ask you to present evidence that proves definitively that Mrs. Rosa Santos obtained her work visa through counterfeit documents, constituting federal crime of fraudulent immigration." Rose felt his heart accelerate. For 15 years he had saved each paper, each voucher, each document related to his visa. "I knew everything was correct, but I also knew the power of the lies well built in experienced hands. These are copies of the original I-94 forms," Blackwood continued, spreading papers on the table like that plays marked cards, where inconsistencies are clearly observed on the country's entry and exit dates. "In addition, we have here testimonials from 3 former colleagues stating that the applicant admitted to working with irregular documentation." Miguel watched every Blackwood movement with surgical attention. For 2 years he had studied not only immigration laws but specifically the tactics of that lawyer. He knew his tricks, his favorite lies, his intimidation strategies, and most importantly, he knew his weaknesses. "These accusations are extremely serious," said Judge Morrison, examining the documents presented. "Mr. Santos, how do you respond to these allegations?" Blackwood laughed softly, turning to his colleagues in the gallery. "Now we'll see if the boy really learned something in college or if it's just another purchased diploma." But Miguel showed no nervousness. On the contrary, there was something almost serene in his posture, as if watching a play whose final already knew. "Can I see these documents, please?" While examining the papers, Miguel remembered the nights he spent at the university legal library, not just studying for the tests, but specifically investigating Blackwood cases. Had discovered a disturbing pattern. The lawyer often had evidence that later proved manufactured or manipulated. "Interesting," Michael muttered, raising one of the forms against the light. "This document is dated March 2018, but the paper has a watermark of 2020. In addition, the serial number does not correspond to the standards of the Internal Security Department of that time." Blackwood's smile has faltered for a moment. "It's just irrelevant technical details. The content is what matters." "Technical details," Miguel repeated calmly, "are exactly what differentiates legitimate evidence from forgery." He went to the judge. "I ask these documents to be subjected to technical expertise before they are accepted as proof." Morrison frowned. "Can Mr. Blackwood explain these discrepancies?" Blackwood tried to keep the composure, but small drops of sweat were beginning to form on his forehead. "Your Excellence are just differences in printing processes. We don't question the authenticity of documents based on such insignificant details." "Insignificant?" Miguel opened his folder and removed a series of carefully organized papers. "Over the past 2 years, I have 17 cases where Mr. Blackwood presented documents with similar discrepancies. In 11 of these cases, later investigations proved forgery." The room was silent. Other immigrant families began to lean forward, realizing that something extraordinary was happening. Some whispered with each other, recognizing their own cases in Miguel's words. "This is a serious, young accusation," said Judge Morrison. "Do you have evidence to support this statement?" Miguel smiled for the first time that morning. "Yes, I have. You are copies of all the cases I mentioned, including the court decisions that invalidated the evidence presented by Mr. Blackwood." Blackwood was visibly disturbed now. His intimidation strategy, which had worked perfectly hundreds of times before, was being systematically destroyed by a young man he had completely underestimated. "Besides," Miguel continued, his voice gaining strength, "I have a recording of a conversation where Mr. Blackwood admits to a colleague who often adjusts documents to ensure faster deportations. The recording was made during a public hospital event, so it's perfectly cool." The color disappeared from Blackwood's face. He remembered that conversation, a casual discussion at the hospital bar where he had boasted from his creative tactics to a fellow admirer. He never imagined that someone could be listening, much less recording. "Can I hear this recording?" the judge asked, clearly intrigued. Miguel connected a small recorder to the room's sound system. Blackwood's voice clearly echoed. "The trick is to make the document seem suspicious without being obviously false. Some dates modified here and there, series numbers." The silence that followed was deafening. Blackwood tried to speak but could not find words. Other lawyers in the gallery murmured with each other, some discreetly rising to leave before being associated with the scandal that was unfolding. Rosa Santos looked at her son with a mixture of pride and astonishment. For years he had worried that Miguel was wasting time with his studies when he could be working. Now I realized that every hour invested in books had been a weapon being forged for this exact moment. Judge Morrison adjusted his glasses, clearly disturbed by the recording. Mr. Blackwood, this is an extremely serious accusation. Document falsification in cases of immigration is a federal crime. Blackwood finally found his voice, but she came out of the shape and defensive. This recording was taken from context. I was just theoretically explaining how some unscrupulous people could manipulate the system. Miguel smiled again, this time with a confidence that made Blackwood back involuntarily. Theoretically, he opened another section of his folder. So how do you explain these emails you sent to assistants, giving specific instructions on how to adjust documents in real cases? What Blackwood didn't know was that Miguel had achieved access to these emails through a former law firm employee, someone who had been fired for refusing to participate in unethical practices. She had kept copies as personal insurance and, seeing Rosa Santos's case in local news, decided it was time to act. Each new evidence that Miguel presented was like a falling domino piece, creating a chain reaction that was destroying not only the specific case, but the whole career and reputation that Blackwood had built on fraudulent bases. And the most disturbing to the lawyer was to realize that this young Philippine, which he had despised as just another ignorant immigrant, had meticulously orchestrated his fall for years. Judge Morrison called a recess of 20 minutes to analyze the evidence presented. During this break, Blackwood retired to the hallway, visibly shaken, trying to recover the composure he had completely lost before Miguel's revelations. "You don't know who you're moving with, boy," Blackwood whispered when he passed Miguel in the hallway. His voice loaded with anger he struggled to control. "I have contacts throughout the system. I can destroy your career even before it starts." Miguel remained impassive, but his eyes shone with a spark that made Blackwood back off instinctively. "Mr. Blackwood," he answered calmly, "your career is already destroyed. You just haven't noticed it yet." During the recess, a woman discreetly approached Miguel. It was Sandra Martinez, former Blackwood office employee who had been fired for refusing to participate in unethical practices. She had followed the case through local news and decided it was time to act. "Miguel," she whispered, giving her a sealed envelope. "Inside there are copies of all emails that B. Blackwood sent instructing employees to change documents. I kept everything as personal insurance after it fired me. Use this to end it once and for all." The envelope contained more than 50 pages of compromising evidence, detailed instructions on how to modify dates in immigration documents, guidelines for creating plausible inconsistencies that justify deportations, and even a quotas spreadsheet of deportations that the hospital expected to reach quarterly. When the audience resumed, Miguel had reorganized his entire strategy. Blackwood returned confidently, clearly believing that their threats in the corridor had intimidated the young lawyer. He had no idea that his former employee had just given Miguel the tools necessary for his complete destruction. "Your Excellence," said Miguel, getting up, "I would like to present additional evidence that has just come to my knowledge." He opened the envelope and started spreading the documents on the table. Blackwood frowned, trying to see what was being presented. When he recognized his own email header, the blood disappeared from his face. "Your Excellency," he stammered, "protest against the introduction of evidence not previously catalogued." "Mr. Blackwood," replied Judge Morrison, examining the papers, "these are emails sent from his own professional address. Are you questioning the authenticity of your own correspondence?" Miguel smiled discreetly. For 2 years he had studied not only the laws, but also Blackwood's psychological tactics. He knew exactly how the lawyer would react under pressure, and each reaction was further feeding his own destruction. "This particular email," Miguel said, raising a sheet, "it's especially interesting. Here, Mr. Blackwood instructs his assistant to correct the entry of a Salvadoran immigrant, turning a legal permanence of 5 years into a supposed visa violation." Rosa Santos watched her son with a mixture of pride and astonishment. She had sacrificed everything so that he could study, but never imagined that those years of deprivation would result in such strategic competence. "Besides," Miguel continued, "we have an email where Mr. Blackwood boasts for a colleague about having solved the problem of problem immigrants of the hospital, using his exact words. The date coincides perfectly with the beginning of mass deportations of employees who had been unionized." Judge Morrison was clearly disturbed by the evidence. "Mr. Blackwood, these are extremely serious accusations. Manipulation of immigration documents is federal crime." Blackwood tried one last card. "These emails have been obtained illegally. I demand that they are excluded from the process." Miguel had anticipated this objection. "Your Excellence, these emails were voluntarily delivered by a former employee who had legitimately as part of their professional functions. There was no invasion or illegal obtaining." Sandra Martinez got up in the gallery. "I confirm, Your Excellence. All of these documents were in my legal possession as a former office supply of the office. What Blackwood didn't know was that Miguel had spent months locating and interviewing former office employees. Sandra was not the only one. During the recess, 3 other former employees had arrived discreetly in court, bringing their own evidence of unethical practices. "I have here too," said Miguel by removing another set of documents, ornamented testimonials from 4 former Blackwood and Associate office employees, all confirming the systematic practice of falsifying immigration documents. Blackwood was clearly panicked now, his hands shaking as he tried to flip his own roles, desperately seeking some defense. "These are unhappy staff," he murmured. "They were fired for incompetence." "Interesting," Miguel answered calmly, "because here we also have the performance evaluations of these same employees. All excellent, until the moment they refused to participate in questionable practices. The layoffs occurred immediately after their ethical objections." The court was absolutely silent. Other immigrant families in the gallery whispered with each other, some recognizing their own cases in the evidence presented. Some cried, realizing that their deportations had been based on manufactured lies. Rosa Santos held her sister's hand, who had come to support her. "For the first time in months, I felt that perhaps there was justice in the world. His son was not only brilliant academically, but he had become a true defender of the oppressed." "Your Excellency," said Miguel with the calm who knows he has already won, "I ask that this case I was filed, and may Mr. Blackwood be investigated by the federal prosecutor for criminal practices related to the falsification of immigration documents." Blackwood tried to get up to protest, but his legs failed. The reality that his career, his reputation, and possibly his freedom were finally destroyed hit him in full force. Judge Morrison looked at Blackwood with a mixture of disgust and disappointment. "Mr. Blackwood, these evidence is extremely disturbing. I am ordering the immediate suspension of this case and the referral of all evidence for federal investigation." Miguel remained serene as he watched the man who had tortured his family and dozens of other families finally face the consequences of their actions. But he knew that was just the beginning. Emails revealed a corruption network that stretched far beyond a single arrogant lawyer. While Blackwood was escorted out of the room by security guards, Miguel opened his folder once more. What no one still knew was that the evidence against Blackwood were just the tip of the iceberg of an investigation that would reveal corruption involving not only lawyers, but hospital administrators, local judges, and even immigration department officials. And Miguel had evidence of everything. Judge Morrison returned after an urgent consultation with the federal prosecutor. His expression was severe when he headed directly to Blackwood. "Mr. Blackwood, based on the evidence presented, I am ordering his immediate arrest for falsifying federal documents and obstruction of justice." Blackwood felt the world crumble around him. "This is absurd. I demand talking to my lawyer." His voice came out strange, brittle, completely different from the arrogance he displayed minutes before. Miguel remained serene, but his eyes shone with silent satisfaction. "For 2 years I had imagined this moment." "Your Excellence," he said calmly, "there is more evidence I would like to present before Mr. Blackwood's arrest." What no one knew was that Miguel had discovered something even more devastating. Blackwood didn't work alone. In Sandra Martinez's emails, there were references to Operation Cleaning, a coordinated scheme between the hospital, some local judges, and immigration department staff to systematically deport employees who have unionized or denounced irregularities. "Here we have," said Miguel by removing a last set of documents, "a detailed spreadsheet with names, dates, and amounts paid to federal employees to accelerate specific deportations. Mr. Blackwood has coordinated a corruption scheme that has affected 200 families in the last 3 years." The room was absolutely silent. Even the security guards stopped to listen. Rosa Santos covered her mouth with her hands, finally understanding the magnitude of what her son had discovered. "Impossible," shouted Blackwood, but his voice was no longer convinced. "This is a frame. This boy is lying." Miguel smiled for the first time with true satisfaction. "Mr. Blackwood, all this evidence was corroborated by the FBI, which 3 months ago investigates the scheme after an anonymous complaint was made." He took a dramatic break. "The complaint was mine." Blackwood's face completely paled. For months he had received strange questions from some colleagues, unexpected visitors in his office, small details that were now making sense. The young Philippine he had despised had meticulously orchestrated not only his fall, but the destruction of the entire corruption network. 3 months ago, Miguel continued, I handed the FBI all the evidence I had collected. They asked me to keep confidential as they expanded the investigation. This audience was the perfect time for the Lord to incriminate publicly. Sandra Martinez got up in the gallery, removing a small device from her pocket. Everything that has been said today has been recorded and transmitted directly to federal agents waiting outside. Blackwood tried to get up, but his legs failed. The reality that he had fallen into a meticulously planned frame by someone who considered intellectually inferior reached him as a punch in the stomach. "You have no idea who you are moving with," he murmured, trying a last desperate card. "I have powerful contacts. This won't be like this." Miguel opened his folder one last time. "Your powerful contacts?" He removed a series of photographs. Judge Henderson, who received $5,000 per deported deportation, arrested this morning. Hospital Administrator Marcus Webb, who coordinated the layoffs, also arrested. Immigration Department official James Morrison. Miguel paused. Cousin of the judge who is presiding over this audience, by the way, also arrested. Judge Morrison confirmed with a serious nod. "My cousin will be tried like any other citizen. The law knows no family ties when it comes to corruption." Blackwood was completely defeated now. Tears of anger and despair ran through his face. "How, as an immigrant managed—" "What did you get?" interrupted Miguel, his voice loaded with a dignity that made Blackwood shrink. "Study more than you, work harder, have more moral integrity, have more strategic intelligence." Rosa Santos watched her son with a pride that transcended words. That young man she had created working double shifts was not just brilliant academically. She was a true defender of justice. "For 2 years," Miguel continued, "I document every crime the Lord committed, every family destroyed, every life ruined. And while the Lord mocked our origin, our color, our social condition, I built the case that would end his criminal career." The federal agents entered the room at that time, directing themselves directly to Blackwood. "Richard Blackwood, you are stuck by conspiracy, falsification of federal documents, bribery, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent." While Blackwood was handcuffed, he looked at Miguel one last time. "You ruined my life," he whispered with hatred. Miguel stared at him without blinking. "No, Mr. Blackwood. I only documented how the Lord ruined his own life. The difference is that now the families the Lord has destroyed will have justice." Other immigrant families in the gallery began to applaud. Some cried with relief. Others shouted words of thanks in different languages. The court, which minutes earlier it was a place of fear and humiliation, had become a symbol that justice was still possible. Sandra Martinez approached Miguel. "Thank you for having the courage to do what I should have done years ago." "Thanks for keeping the evidence," Miguel replied. "Without your help, Blackwood and the others would still be destroying families." While Blackwood was escorted out of court in handcuffs, Miguel hugged his mother. Rosa whispered in her ear, "Your grandfather would be very proud. You became exactly the man he dreamed of it." Judge Morrison hit the hammer one last time. "If you are filed, Mrs. Santos, her rights of permanence in the country are completely restored." But Miguel knew this was just the beginning. The evidence that had delivered to the FBI would reveal a network of corruption that extended to dozens of other cities. Hundreds of families would have their deportations revised, and he, the Filipino who had been humiliated and underestimated, would be remembered as one who had the courage to face an entire system. While leaving court, Miguel looked back one last time. In that room he had learned that real strength does not come from screaming louder or having more money, but of having patience to document the truth and courage to present it at the right time. And now, with Blackwood destroyed and the dismantled corruption network, Miguel was sure that this was just the first of many cases in which he would use his legal knowledge to defend the helpless. 3 months later, Miguel Santos was sitting at his new office in downtown Chicago, overlooking Michigan Lake. The golden plate on the door, Leah, Santos and Associates, Immigration and Civil Rights. At 24, he had become the most sought-after immigration lawyer in the city. The phone ringed incessantly. Families that had been separated by deportations based on counterfeit documents from Blackwood now had their cases reviewed and guaranteed victories. The FBI had reopened more than 300 lawsuits, and Miguel represented a free 60% of them. "Senor Santos," said Maria, her new assistant. "Chicago Tribune reporter is here for the Youth Lawyer's Interview of the Year." Miguel smiled, remembering the day Blackwood had moved his origin. Now that same young Filipino was on the cover of legal magazines as a symbol of the new generation of civil rights advocates. Rosa Santos had been promoted to the nursing supervisor at the hospital after the investigation revealed that she was one of the most competent employees of the institution. The fear of deportation that haunted her for years had been proud to have raised a child who changed the system. "Mom," Miguel called her during lunch, "remember when you said that studying law was a big dream for our family?" "I remember, son," Rosa answered her emotion-embargoed voice. "But you proved that there are no dreams too big when you have the courage to fight." Blackwood, on the other hand, faced a very different destination. Condemned, 15 years in federal arrest, he had lost his license to advocate. His luxurious home was confiscated to pay compensation to the families he damaged, and his wife had asked for divorce after discovering the extension of their crimes. In prison, Blackwood shared cell with other white-collar criminals. His former golf club colleagues avoided mentioning his name, and the newspapers still published articles about the deportation scheme he had orchestrated. "Do you know what impresses me most about your story, Miguel?" the reporter asked during the interview. "How did you get calm in class throughout the process?" Miguel reflected for a moment. "When you grow up seeing your mother work double shifts to pay for your studies, when you need to deliver pizza during the day so you can study at night, you learn that true strength doesn't come from screaming or humiliating others. It comes from preparing better, working harder, and never giving up justice." Sandra Martinez had been hired as an investigator by Miguel's firm. His courage to denounce Blackwood had inspired other former employees to talk about unethical practices in their workplaces, generating a wave of reforms in the city's legal system. "Miguel has changed our lives," Sandra told the reporter. "He taught us that an ordinary person can make a difference when he has the courage to face injustice." Miguel's office had become a symbol in the immigrant community. Families traveled from other states to seek legal representation, knowing that they would find not only technical competence, but also someone who truly understood their struggles. During a conference on immigrant rights at Northwestern University, Miguel was presented as former student prominence. In the auditorium, students of various ethnic groups heard him talk about how to turn personal injustice into social change. "Some of you may face prejudice for its origin, skin color, or economic situation," Miguel told the microphone. "Remember, when someone tries to diminish them, it is actually revealing their own insecurities. Use this as a fuel to become even better." At the end of the lecture, a young Latin student approached. "Mr. Santos, I also faced discrimination here at the university. How did you manage not to give up?" Miguel smiled, remembering himself years earlier. "Do you do everything, study more than anyone, and never allow the prejudice of others to define their limits? The best revenge is not to destroy who harms us. It is to build something bigger than they could ever imagine." That night, Miguel drove to the neighborhood where he had grown. He stopped in front of the pizzeria where he worked as a delivery man during his studies. The owner, Mr. Giuseppe, went out to greet him. "Miguel, I saw you on television, my son. I always knew it would be someone special." "Thank you, Giuseppe. It was here that I learned the value of honest work." Upon returning home, Miguel found a letter on his table. It was from a young Texas immigrant who had seen his story in the news. "Mr. Santos, I am also studying right and facing discrimination. Your story gave me strength to continue." Miguel kept the letter carefully. It was proof that his struggle had transcended his personal case, inspiring others not to give up his dreams in the face of prejudice. Blackwood had tried to humiliate him by saying, "You have no right to speak here," but Miguel proved that the right to speak, fight, and win belonged to anyone willing to work for it. 3 years later, while Blackwood was in prison, Miguel built a legacy of justice that would change the lives of thousands of families. The best revenge, Miguel had discovered, was not to destroy Blackwood, was to build something so significant that prejudiced attitudes seemed ridiculously small in the face of the positive impact a person can have on the world. If this story of overcoming injustice has touched your heart, be sure to subscribe to the channel to discover more stories that prove that sometimes facing injustice is the first step to discovering a force you didn't even know you had. Leave in the comments if you have faced prejudice and how you reacted. Your story can inspire other people to never give up on fighting for what is right.